Okay, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome Dr. Bradford S. Weeks. He's from the Weeks Clinic in Whidbey Island, Washington. Brad has been a longtime member of our association. He's a very faithful supporter. He's brought a number of people here this year. He's also one of our instructors, and we're just thrilled to have him speak every time he offers. So please give him a warm welcome, Dr. Bradford S. Weeks.
Thank you. Well, I am going to keep this to 42 minutes. And I will need your help on that. So we'll get started now, and I like to keep track. I'm happy to be here. And here's to Stephen Ayers, who was my teacher in this process initially in 2001. And Gus, who's probably wandering around outside. Fabulous courage for Gus to put all this together here. Annie, all the team, all of the people who are making things happen, I'm very appreciative. And I thank you. And it's really, for me, it's fabulous to look out on a group of people who have as much integrity and as much courage and principle as I think this group represents. So I come here for the knowledge I'll gain from my peers, but also to be inspired and to be encouraged. So I thank you all for your participation. I am doing something called corrective medicine in psychiatry. Corrective medicine simply suggests we try to correct the imbalances. It's another way of saying what we all do. But it's the term that I've chosen, and my patients understand that. So my goal today is to explain to you all, to share the best that I can of what I value about my practice. I am humbled really by the speakers who've come before. These people are great scientists. I don't know if everybody followed Dr. Moon's presentation. I'm humbled by Dr. Moon, for example. I don't think I'll ever really understand what he does. So I'm not going to be speaking to you in any sense as a scientist like that. I'm one of those hard-working clinicians in the trenches trying to apply things. And I've had a lot of great success, and I feel very fortunate in what we're doing with cancer patients, so I'll share that. First thing I wanted to say is, for some of us in the meeting last night, Frank Schallenberger said, which of us would not choose IPT if we had cancer? And of course, no hands went up, because all of us who understand this, if we had cancer, would choose IPT, and that speaks volumes. The question he didn't ask, though, is which of us would only use IPT if we had cancer? And again, in that case, no hands would have gone up. Because one of the big messages I want you to understand has to do with what's called cancer stem cells. Cancer stem cells are, in contradistinction to cancer tumor cells, are not responsive to chemotherapy and radiation. So even though IPT is a kinder and gentler way to do chemotherapy, it still is chemotherapy, and we need to do a lot more than simply chemotherapy. So I want to touch on some of that. I also think that the most important orientation I have to my practice, and I share it with you in case it fits, is what I call the trickle-down effect. And by that I mean, I have the belief and the experience that my thoughts affect my feelings. And my feelings affect my physiology. If I'm scared, that'll make some adrenaline happen. And my physiology affects my biochemistry. So why give Prozac, a biochemical substance, to affect the feelings and the thoughts? Why have to work up that chain, starting with a biochemical substance, when you can take advantage of this extraordinary experience we all have of being able to think and to be able to frame our reality? So the trickle-down effect is to encourage people to pay attention to their thoughts and their beliefs. And when I get to my slide lecture, the last slide, I think, is a great Ann Landers quote. And she says, if you can't be kind, be vague. And we all hate it when the doctor says to the patient, you have 6 weeks to live. Well, I think that's close to criminal. At least he should be a little vague, like, The future is not rosy. But how dare he trespass into the realm of belief and insert with his white coat and everything else that belief system. So this process of paying attention to our patients' thought processes and beliefs, this is where I start. And I think I just want to underscore that for us. Now, I heard Dr. Moon say, in terms of epigenetics, I love this, he said, we decide our gene expression. Well, I would take that in a literal sense, that our thought process and our belief is an epigenetic factor that we need to pay attention to. And I think Bob had this great picture of the mastodon under the microscope. And of course, that's the fact that there's a human being in front of you. I remember in medical school, one of my doctors said, the dumbest kidney is smarter than the smartest doctor. And we have to remember that the patient, almost unbeknownst to them, comes to the table with a huge momentum towards health, a tremendous capacity for spontaneous healing. And it's the big white mastodon under the microscope that we have a human being. And that's got an infinite potential. So when I hear the work about the molecular screening and so forth, I like all that, and I use those the chemosensitivity tests, and I think it's fabulous. But it's not a genetic problem, I believe. I don't even think it's a cell wall deficient organism problem or a heavy metal toxicity problem. These things are cofactors. But it's fundamentally, in my opinion, the cancer process begins with a belief. And that is why, does anybody know what group of patient populations has the lowest incidence of cancer? If you could have any diagnosis to avoid cancer, what would it be? Schizophrenia. So if I think I am the Lord Jesus Christ, God bless him, that's going to be a pretty good immune booster, right? So it's a classic example of how our thoughts affect our immunology. And these people who believe, this irritating patient who comes into you and says, I don't have any need for chemotherapy, I'll be spontaneously healed. Do not dissuade that person of that belief. So the spontaneous healing, you know, Rick had this great quote from St. Augustine that miracles don't happen in contradiction to nature, but simply in contradiction to what we understand about nature. Humility is important there. I also want to remind us about the power of words. One of the main reasons why we speak in Latin and we take someone who says, I have a sore joint, and you say, no, that's arthritis. Well, that's Latin, arthra, and itis, that's sore joint. So they say they have a sore joint, we say, no, we know better, and we tell them the same thing in Latin. Fibromyalgia, sounds much better than I'm hurting everywhere. But the concept is, that's for our insecurities. The Bible says that Adam was given dominion, and one of his charges was to name everything in Eden. Well, once you name something, you have dominion over it. I have a friend whose girlfriend tried to rename him, and I counseled him against letting that happen. It happened anyway, and they didn't last more than about a year. But when we name the power of words, which Bob mentioned earlier, is very important. And so let's talk about terms in general. You know, what is a doctor? We know it's teacher, ducere, to lead or teach. And initially, remember, it were the barbers who did the actual surgery, and the physicians and surgeons, Columbia School of Physicians and Surgeons. A physician or a doctor traditionally didn't do a lot. Remember, they just kind of sat by the bedside and counseled. Antibiotics showed up in the 30s, and it was a different deal. There was something the doctors could really offer. But for the most part, it was more of a guide or a coach, and the surgeons did things. What's curious about my role now is that now I'm doing things to people. I'm giving them chemotherapy. I never would have dreamed that I would give chemotherapy. So we're not just counseling, we're also doing the other work. But in terms of what a doctor is, if we remember that we are fundamentally teachers, that means we have to pay attention to the patient's thought process and the learning, and we have to encourage. Now, who is the patient? Well, I consider them a fourfold being. I'll say to the patient, I'll slap the knee and I'll say, this is not you. This knee, this physical body is not you. This physical body is your life support system, without which you couldn't, as a spiritual being, walk on this earth. And you have feelings. That's also not you. You know, I am mad is different than I feel mad. Also nice to have our cancer patients not say, I am a cancer patient, but to say, I feel that I have cancer. So trying to, without going into a lot of detail there, because it's for us to figure out for ourselves, the patient is there with a tremendous momentum and should be empowered to the greatest degree possible, in my opinion. Now, so what's a doctor? What's a patient? A doctor, I'm going to say, from my perspective, is primarily a teacher, and a patient is ideally an empowered collaborator working with the doctor towards the patient's goals. Don't presume the patient wants to live. I think that about 60% of my male cancer patients over 60 don't want to live. You have to ask them, and they'll say, well, frankly, you know, my wife wants me to live, but I don't want to bankrupt my family. I'm tired. I'm ready to go. I don't want pain. You know, so what are we doing if they don't want to live? We certainly don't want to force vitality upon them, but there should be a collaborative process, a discussion. Now, I'm going to talk about cancer as cellular attention deficit disorder. Cancer as a confused process, as an antisocial, confused process. And the goal is to not kill, in my opinion, the cancer cell. The goal is to help the patient reintegrate all the instruments in its orchestra. And I like Dr. Moon showed us that one adenoma became a polyp. You heard that. And so that's kind of what we should be paying attention to, is not killing these cancers, but like the teacher who has a bunch of ADHD kids, she doesn't take them out back and shoot them. You know, she says, how can I bring some resources to bear to help these people go along? Now, I think I'm stuck. Is this going to work?